But to believe a lie that you are not equipped for the challenges, you are not equipped for the calling that God has in your life that he's created you for is a lie. You are fully equipped and ready to jump into some of the life's biggest challenges, to join God, to partner with him, to be yoked with him, to create the future.
Welcome to the Daron Earlewine Podcast, where we awaken you to become who you were born to be. Here's your host, Daron Earlewine.
Hey, welcome to the last episode of the Daron Earlewine Podcast for 2020. And hey, thank God it's almost over, right? 2020, what a year. 2021 has to get better, I think, right? Let's hope it has to. But welcome back to the final episode of the Daron Earlewine Podcast. I want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for joining me throughout this year as we, just tons of pivots this year. Started the year, if you're been around the podcast for years, you know we were doing the Born to Be podcast, and then this feed became the Radio Theology podcast for a couple of years, and we mixed them together, and then COVID canceled Radio Theology, and we kind of repurposed everything and pivoted a touch, and now it's the Daron Earlewine Podcast. And maybe you've joined us new in the past couple months. Maybe you've been here for years. Regardless of how long you've been listening or subscribing to the podcast, I want to say thank you so much. We're a community together. We're growing together. We're taking steps together to become who God's created us to be. And thank you so much for being a part of the community, being part of the podcast. And so we are landing this year. And here's what I thought we'd do is just do a little recap, is grab a couple of my highlights from these past 20 episodes of the Daron Earlewine Podcast, these first 20 episodes. And what I want to do is grab three that really stuck out to me, that impacted me a ton. And if you haven't gone back and listened to, maybe you just joined in the podcast, you never have gone back to listen to episode 1 or some of the other ones, this will give you an idea of maybe where to go back and start. And maybe you want to be listening to these as you're wrapping up 2020 or jumping into 2021. And the first one I want to hit was actually episode 1 of the Daron Earlewine Podcast. And we sat down with the new friend to me, Amy Barge. And Amy has a journey that is not unlike many people. She chased dreams. She had a sense of identity wrapped around those dreams, and then that dream died. She found herself in a difficult divorce, and everything that she knew in life seemed like it was inaccessible and it was gone. And the reason I picked this episode is it just, Amy hits and kind of wraps up her journey in some ways and the learning process through it in just a very, very accessible way. And I think you're going to love it and be able to understand the point she lays out and how encouraging they can be to you. The reason I chose this one is because I almost feel like it encapsulates this year a little bit. And it was maybe fitting that it was episode 1. And one of the things I talked about in that episode is that COVID can't cancel your calling. And neither can the death of a dream, a divorce, a sickness, an addiction, whatever it may be that you're fighting through, that you're recovering from, is the fact that you've had pain, the fact that you've had death, the fact that you have had a pandemic, that you've had quarantine, you've had things that you have lost, that you may have held very dear, and that you may have even found identity in. Even if they're removed, your calling is irrevocable. Who God has created you to be on purpose and for a purpose, it's unchanging. And as hard as we try sometimes to sabotage it or other people do, God is faithful in it. And as we jump in to just a highlight from episode 1 with Amy Barge, you're gonna be encouraged by this. And if you want to go back and listen to it, it's on the feed. It's episode 1. You can go check it out. And here's the scripture I want you to be ready to listen to, or just kind of set this highlight in. It's Romans 11:29, and it says this: "For God's gifts in His call are irrevocable." Nothing this year, nothing last year, nothing next year can cancel God's call and His gifts in your life, because you are created on purpose and for a purpose, and nothing can cancel that. Let's check out this highlight from episode 1 this year with Amy Barge.
It was interesting because I remember having a very exact moment where I was so angry at God. I remember it's like saying out loud, like, I am done with you. This is over. Like, I can't believe you let this happen to me. And that lasted about a day. And then I realized, okay, wait a minute. I've believed in God my whole life. I have seen Him show up and take care of me. Why would I think that that's going to change now just because my circumstances have changed? So I decided, okay, sorry, God, I'd rather have you with me than not with me.
Yeah.
So that it was funny because it really did only last about a day.
Do you feel like, Amy, do you feel like it was important to be that honest in that moment with God?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things. I think that probably allowed me the freedom that since then I've had many moments like that where not that I wanted to completely turn away, but where I have really wrestled. And I remember one day laying in the floor, like pounding my fist against the floor going, why is this happening? And then, I went on and something else happened and I kept moving. But I think it's necessary to have those real ugly moments.
Yeah. So you got to one of those, you got really honest, and then 24 hours later, you were like, you know what? No, we'll keep going.
Yeah. Glad I made that decision.
And then how did God begin to show up and I guess honor your honesty from that?
Yeah. So one of the big things that happened, I ended up leaving my career as an educator. Honestly, I couldn't afford to stay as a teacher. I had to do something else. And even in the way he brought me to different jobs, it was amazing how that all happened. It's like lots of stories. But at one point I was working in downtown Chicago and I really felt like it was time to do something else. It was time to leave Chicago because it was expensive to live there. My kids were grown and gone at that point. I'm like, why am I staying here? And so I quit my job. I put my house on the market, and I remember so vividly, I had to let a realtor in one day for a showing. They didn't have a key or something. And as this couple stepped across the threshold, this thought came to me, these people are going to buy your house. And it was so bizarre and like out of the blue that I didn't even tell anybody because I thought nobody's going to believe this. They're going to think I'm crazy. But less than a week later, that couple gave me a full price offer on my home.
Wow.
So I really felt like that was God saying, yes, go ahead and move. But I had a lot of fear around that move because I was leaving everything I had known. I moved to Indiana, moved in with my sister and her family, didn't have a job or a place to live. And I started looking for both. And I found this area that had beautiful brand new townhomes being constructed with woods and a creek. And I remember saying this out loud, I want to be in that spot, that corner lot overlooking that woods and that creek. And they told me, oh, that's been sold, So I was like, okay. But I continued to drive through that neighborhood as I kept looking for a job. And I'll never forget it. It was the day before my birthday. They called me and said, get over here. The woman who had bought that unit that was under construction had to back out. Do you want it? And I walked in. Not only was it the unit that I wanted, it was the exact floor plan that I wanted.
Wow.
And I remember my best friend saying to me, Amy, you trusted God during all those difficult times in your divorce. Maybe you need to trust him for something good in your life because I didn't have a job. Like, how do you buy something without a job? So I said, okay. And I bought it thinking, okay, surely in 2 months, by the time we close, I'll have a job because I had a lot of interviews. Well, we get right up to closing, no job. So I'm like, oh, God, why? This isn't right. I'm supposed to get the job and then, the house, and I'm trying to do it the right way. So I was able to use the money from the house that I had sold in Chicago. And then I had to sell a bunch of this stock that I had gotten as part of my divorce settlement. That was in May of 2008. So I buy this townhome outright, thinking not my plan. Right. Well, that fall is when the whole stock market crashed and everything happened. Yeah. My financial advisor called me and he goes, hey, remember that stock that you sold in the spring so that you could buy your home? I'm like, yeah. He said, yeah, it was $42 a share when you sold it. Guess what it is right now? I had no idea. Less than $4 a share.
Wow.
And I remember in that moment thinking, okay, I couldn't see the reason why, and yet clearly there's something bigger than me that is, watching over me and orchestrating that. I told my friends I wanted to take out a full page ad in the Indy Star and say, God is alive and at work, because I just felt like he was just blessing me so much through that. So yeah, it was pretty amazing.
And we're back. back. Amy Barge. I told you it was good. That's how we kicked it off. That was the leadoff man this year, okay? For 2020, halfway through the year, right? Because COVID tried to cancel my calling, tried to cancel everything around us. And so we recreated this. We created this studio. We recreated the brand, the podcast, and launched that this fall. And man, that was episode 1. Thanks, Amy, for being on the podcast, and it was a great highlight. The next one I want to highlight to you guys, or just bring us back to, is my conversation with my wife, Julie Earlewine. Another highlight for me here in 2020. This was episode 4, also called "Are People Really Doing the Best They Can?" And if you go back and listen to this one, it was one we shot during the quarantine time, and Julie and I at home together. And so the audio, the video is a little bit different because it wasn't shot here in studio, but the content is so deep. And Julie takes you back through her story of in childhood, the pain of the dream really of a family being together was lost, and her parents divorced when she was very young. She was 2, and in the process of just walking through that pain, and how God brought her her dad, Larry, not her biological father, but what she knows as her dad, into her life, and just the redemption of that process. And you know, I love this episode because it's very personal to me. But more than that, one of the things that I think is so foundational when we look at this episode and this redemption story arc that Julie takes us through is that question that we borrowed from Brene Brown when she talks about, are people really doing the best they can? And over this past year, my guess is that you may not have been as pleased with yourself as you thought you would have been. And I think sometimes we don't know what we're made of. We don't know how resilient we are until life really begins to test us. And this year tested us. What is also true is we may not be sure what the people around us are made of until life tests them. And then in this year showed us that. And there may have been some moments that were very disappointing to you about yourself. There may be some moments this year that were very disappointing for you about people around you. And not to move past it as in like sweep it under the rug, but to find healing, to be able to lay a foundation of compassion that would be able to lead you to a place of forgiveness and healing. I think you have to get to the place of believing that people are doing the best they can. If you don't start there, it's so easy for you to put all of your assumption, all of your expectations, all of the things that you think they should or could have done better or should or could be doing better. And what that tends to do is sow more resentment and bitterness in us than it does compassion and forgiveness. And so maybe that's a place to start for yourself as we close out 2020. As we listen to this highlight from Julie's episode, you can go back and listen to the whole thing. It's obviously in the feed. But maybe you need to start there with yourself for 2020. Maybe you had a bunch of goals, a bunch of things you were going to accomplish, a bunch of weight you were going to lose, a bunch of books you were going to write or read, jobs you were going to do, things that you were going to accomplish. And you look back and you go, you know what? I just barely made it through this year. Maybe you're in college right now and you were like, man, I was going to get this GPA and this thing, but the virtual classes and this, it was more challenging than I thought, and I barely made it. And now I'm discouraged. Maybe I'm fighting some depression about that. What would happen if you ended this year and looked back and offered yourself compassion and said, you know what? I did the best I could. Start there. Now, does that mean that needs to be your best next year? No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. It's not a limiting statement. It's a compassionate statement that allows you to deal with what was and to begin to prepare for what could be. Let's listen to this episode highlight with Julie Earlewine as she unpacks some of her process of coming to the place of believing and being okay with the fact that maybe her biological dad did the best that he could. And God filled in the rest. Let's listen to this highlight from our conversation, our episode with my wife, Julie Earlewine, right here on the Daron Earlewine Podcast.
Mom and Dad actually were working on their wills And they're in their 70s, and they were like getting all of their like final affairs in order, and they were meeting with the lawyer, and they wanted to put me as the, like, what do you call it? Like the main person on the will. Like I'm the person who's like in charge of their estate whenever they have to have, what's it called? Anyway, executor.
I was going to say
say
executioner.
No, they're not. I'm not going to be an executioner, Mom and Dad. I promise. Executor of the will to manage the, all their end of life stuff, and they would not list me as my dad's daughter on the will. And he was like, "What are you talking about? Like, she's my daughter." He's like, "Well, biologically, like, she's not your daughter. Like, she's legally not your daughter. I can't list her. I won't list her in the will as your daughter. She can still do it, but I won't list her as your daughter." And he was like, "I don't like that." He's like, "I don't want it that way." And she's like, "Well, there's no way. The only way you could do it is if you adopt her, and you're probably not going to adopt her. Her biological father would have to sign off on that, and she's in her 40s." And my mom's like, "Well, actually, her biological father passed away a few years ago." And so it was the cutest my parents live in North Carolina. It was like literally the cutest phone call of my whole entire life. My parents figured out FaceTime. It was probably one of the first times they figured out FaceTime. And they called, and they're sitting at the kitchen table. And my dad was like, I've wanted to do this your whole life. But he was like, "I would like for you to let me adopt you. And for you to be all mine." And in that single moment, I literally felt like my whole life, like all of the healing and all of the hurting and all the protecting I had done over our boys to make sure they knew they would never be abandoned or left without. It all came full circle. So I was 42. Is that right? Because I was 42, and my dad adopted me. And so now I'm all his. I have a birth certificate that proves it. And it sounds kind of silly, you're 40, but it doesn't matter how old you are. When you finally feel like your whole life is what it was always meant to be, even if it's on a paper, like that's what we always were. It didn't, what we always were. It actually didn't change any of the 38 years before that, but it just confirmed them all. It confirmed everything my dad was. It confirmed everything our family was. Confirmed everything that God had done to look over my life and say, I have a plan. I have a plan for her. And I told Daron once, right after Terry died, that one of the struggles was that my biological father and my mom, they had me. And then they got a divorce. And then, my mom and my dad, they got married and they had my brother. And they did a great job of me always being a part of their family. It was never a question that I wasn't. And then Terry had gone on and he had his life over here. And there were days I really struggled that I've always sort of felt like I lived my life on this island alone, but attached to bridges to other people. And, Daron said to me, you've not been on an island alone. You've been married to me for 20 years. And the beauty of God's plan was that he oversaw everything with my mom to get her to my dad, to take care of me, to get me to Daron, so that we could create an island for our family that we are doing the best we can and fighting as hard as we can to make it whole and strong and honoring, and for our boys to be raised to create families that love people and love Jesus.
And we're back. Great job, Julie. Man, she's awesome. She's been so awesome for 20 years of being her husband. So good. She needs to start her own podcast. Maybe work on that in 2021. Listen, our last highlight that I want to give you guys from our 2020 episodes of the Daron Earlewine Podcast, it was one of my favorites, and it was an episode that actually I felt like began to change the trajectory of the next month. It was like a watershed episode that set up the next 4 or 5 that kept bringing us back to this huge question. The question is this: what are you doing about the world's greatest problems? Huge question. But what I think is, if we want to start living the life that God's created us to live, we got to start asking God-sized questions. And maybe we're living small because we're not asking big enough questions about the problems in our world and about the God who actually created and sustains and owns the cattle on 1,000 hills and has the answers and solutions and the blueprints that we need to move in to see his kingdom come and his will be done. And the episode with Ben Cooley started us on that process, and it was so good. Ben is the founder and president of Hope for Justice. And if you listened to this episode, if you watched it, you know he is absolutely amped to be stoked to be on earth every day. He is a high energy dude. The interview was infectious with energy and just, it was so good. The story of how a 26-year-old aspiring opera singer all of a sudden starts changing the world and working to actually free individuals that are in slavery. Absolutely inspiring interview. Such good content in this episode from Ben. He just drops truth bombs all over the place. Talks so much about the thoughts and the words that are shaping and creating our life, and that we're in an environment where people are speaking words and are modeling a life that can give life to the world. It's so good. I want to get to it and just let Ben's energy begin to get you ready for the new year. Because guess what? In 2021, there's still a lot of problems in this world. But God's calling and his gifts in your life are irrevocable. And he's asking you, he's inviting you to step into these problems and to find a lot of purpose and a lot of passion and a lot of peace in your life as you join him in creating the future, as you join him and seeing his kingdom come and his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Let's jump in right now to this highlight from our episode with Ben Cooley.
So we're facing now mass unemployment, food crisis. We're facing now legislation that's changing. Now we're facing businesses that now been so hurt and harmed. I was speaking to a FTSE 100 company leader, right? One of the Fortune 500 leaders. And they said to me this, they said, Ben, the human rights agenda for companies right now is taking a 9 to 10 year step back.
Wow.
Now enter us, the good, the noble, and the people that care about the least and the last and the lost. Now it is our time. It was bad before COVID, but now there's billions of people that are vulnerable. So my question to your listeners is this: what are you going to do about it? Because it's when, I love that quote from Edmund Burke, all that's required for evil to prevail is for good men and women to do nothing. So what's your something?
Wow. We could end it right there, but I don't want to, because I want some more, but that's it. I mean, that's what it comes down to. And there's opportunities all around us to step into it. I think that the simple thing is just to get distracted into whatever else we're doing and keep moving.
I love the quote that says, what we don't need is spasms of passion, but long obedience in the same direction. I think you're right.
So how did you not do that, Ben? You could have, those many months ago, you've heard about human trafficking and it captured your heart, but you could have gone on doing what you wanted to do, what you had planned in your life. Why didn't you just turn the other way and go do whatever you wanted to do?
Because vision pulls you in. Because when you find out your purpose, it's contagious, right? But actually, it's not just because of my purpose. It's actually because I find the right seat on the bus as well, right? It's interesting because many people get the right zone. They get the right vision, right? But they actually don't find their place in it, right? My chairman says there's two reasons why people leave an organization. One, they don't know the vision, but the second, they don't know their place in it. And what I think is the greatest gift that you can learn as a leader, as someone that's wanting to be a leader, is to fight like you. You know, I trained as an opera singer, right? And, I used to play, I was a bass baritone. I don't know if you know much about bass baritones, Daron, but let me tell you, they always played the granddad role. They always played the person that lost a woman and always lost a fight. And I remember one time I was at the back of the stage and I was like, hey, this guy that's just about to come on, he's going to beat me in the fight. He's going to win the woman. And that's the only reason, right? I was looking out at the audience and I was like, they ain't going to believe this. They're looking at me. I'm like, I could totally take that guy. Like, and she's going to pick him over me? I mean, look at me. Even with like gray in my beard, I'm better looking than that guy. Like, and so I'm looking at him, I'm going, the only reason why he is going to beat me in the fight, win the woman, is because he's a tenor. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to go and be a tenor. And so I went to my apartment and I got my keyboard out. And I used to live with lots of other opera singers. And I started singing Nessun Dorma. You know Nessun Dorma, right? You know, if you can sing Nessun Dorma, you're a tenor. Right? And it was going pretty well up until that point. You know the point I mean. It's like, Vincero, Vincero. Come on, I can do all things through Christ who gives me. Vincero, don't throw away your confidence, for it will be richly rewarded. Vincero. At that point in time, there was a knock on my door. It was Mike, my flatmate and fellow opera singer. He said, Ben, are you all right? I didn't say anything. Ben, I hate to tell you this. You're not a tenor. You're a bass baritone. I know it's silly, but you know, one of the best gifts that you can be is you. So if you can like speak well. If you can dance. If you can create videos. If you can do the best podcast. If you can be a lawyer, advocate. If you can be a police officer, investigate. If you can be a businessman and create wealth, give to this, because if all of us do our part and play our part, and we all put our all in, but it's our all in with us, you know, fighting like us. That's what David did. You know what? I would go back to that story. You see, the reason why David was so successful is he didn't take on the armor of Saul. He fought like him. Everyone else looked at him and went, it's a sling and a stone. But he went, boom. And it was that plus the power of God. It was the fact that he just went, this is all I have, right? It's only a sling. It's not like this can just have you just a knitting or just a nurse, but you can add that to vision, purpose, and the power of God. Then giants were meant to be slain, and Goliath will fall.
And we're back. Whoa, Ben Cooley, full energy. You kidding me? That's a full octane, like 93 octane type episode with Ben. You can go back and find that one. I think it's episode like 7 or something like that. Go back and find that episode and end this year with the full episode with Ben. Go back and listen to it. Listen. What are you doing about the world's greatest problems? Because here's the good news. God has created you. You're his workmanship, his craftsmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which he's prepared you. He's prepared you in advance to do, meaning that you are equipped. You may not feel ready. You may not feel prepared. We're all there. But to believe a lie that you are not equipped for the challenges, you are not equipped for the calling that God has in your life that he's created you for is a lie. You are fully equipped and ready to jump into some of the life's biggest challenges, to join God, to partner with him, to be yoked with him, to create the future, to walk into a life of purpose and passion and peace. You are absolutely equipped by God, because when you enter a covenant relationship with him, he actually changes your identity. And within that process of changing your identity and making you a child of God, he places his spirit within you. And when his spirit comes into you, your spiritual DNA comes alive. And now you move forward with the authority of God. You have the authority of the living God to move out in obedience, to move out in power, and to actually join him in creating the future that is on his heart and on his mind. And right now, we need an army of people, a family of people to step up in 2021 and get arm in arm and heart and mind to mind with Jesus and start creating a future that is full of hope and full of peace, full of love, full of faith, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control. There's been a lot that has been deconstructed in 2020, and I believe in 2021, it's time for you to step up and begin constructing what is currently on God's heart and God's mind. And it's going to be a life in your family, in your community, in your school, in your church, that's going to bring great joy, that's going to bring great passion, that's going to be shaped with great purpose. It probably won't be easy, but nothing worthwhile is ever really easy. And I don't think you want an easy life. I think you want a life of meaning. I think you want a life of significance. I think you want a life that matters. So going into 2021, friends, I hope this look back at 2020, some of the highlights of the Daron Earlewine Podcast got you ready. Let's go. No more wasting time. We did the best we could with 2020. We got through it. Now it's time to go next level in 2021 and start creating this future on God's heart and God's mind that you were created for. You're fully equipped. You don't feel prepared, but that's the fun part, my friends. That's where the faith kicks in. Let's do it, huh? And I'm excited to be a co-journeyer, a co-laborer with you in 2021. I'll do my best to help guide you in these next steps, your next step to becoming you're born to be, an arm in arm, mind to mind, spirit to spirit. We're going to move forward together as a community, and that's why this podcast is such a joy to do. I love you guys. I believe in you. I pray for you. Our team prays for you. Let's go, huh? Let's get it in 2021. God bless you. And until we talk in a brand new year, remember these three things. God is for you. He's not against you. He's near you, not far from you. And he's created you on purpose and for a purpose. It's been a beautiful year. I love you. I'll talk to you next time right here on the Daron Earlewine Podcast.